All right, so you ready to dive into some seriously fascinating stuff?
Always.
Okay, excellent. So we've got a YouTube video analyzing Genesis 1 and then an excerpt from Genesis 2, so a nice mix of sources today for our deep dive. Um, what do you think about when you hear creation stories? Like, what comes to mind?
I think about how much staying power they have. I mean, they show up everywhere
Yeah, they really do.
in art, philosophy, even like modern day debates.
Totally. And, we're going to be tackling some big questions today, like what does let there be light really signify? How does this story portray the relationship between humans and nature? And what are the implications of being made in the image of God?
Those are the big ones for sure.
Yeah, they are. So, to start us off, let's unpack the YouTube video's analysis of Genesis 1. We'll start there, and then we'll move on to Genesis 2 later.
Sounds good to me. Let's do it.
Okay, so the YouTuber starts things off with this super dramatic opening, right? It's this formless void, darkness, even the water sounds chaotic. And then, bam, let there be light. It's like the universe takes a breath for the first time.
It's a pretty powerful moment.
Hmm.
And I think it's important to remember that light here isn't just about, literal illumination.
Right.
It's more symbolic. Think of it like knowledge, order, maybe even the foundation of existence itself.
Mhm.
It's when things shift from possibility to actually being.
Like the universe's on switch.
Exactly.
I like that. And then what happens? We see this repeating pattern, right? Of separation and naming, like sky from the water, land from the sea. It's like watching the world being built piece by piece.
Yeah. And that act of naming, it's more than just slapping a label on something.
Right.
It's about giving an identity and purpose to every single element. Like they each have a role to play.
Like the creator is giving them their marching orders, huh?
Right. And don't forget that phrase, and God saw that it was good. It keeps coming back again and again throughout the chapter.
It does, doesn't it?
Like the creator is taking a step back, looking at what's been made and saying, yep, that's good. That's exactly how I wanted it.
It really emphasizes how intentional it all is.
Exactly.
Okay, so next up, the sun, moon, and stars. But the YouTuber points out they're not just sources of light, right? They're like the ultimate timekeepers.
And what do timekeepers give us? Think about it, calendars, seasons, the cycle of day and night. They help us understand our place in time and our position in the universe.
Wow, that's deep. It's like setting the cosmic clock for everything that follows.
Exactly. And then things get really exciting because life. The waters are teeming with creatures. Animals of all kinds are roaming the land like one of those awesome nature documentaries.
Totally. It's a great way to imagine that burst of life.
And again, there's that emphasis on order. Remember, according to their kind.
Yeah, what do you think that means?
Well, I think about how we humans try to categorize and understand the world around us, right?
Mm-hmm.
From those ancient systems to like modern biology. It's all about making sense of the richness of creation.
So maybe it's saying that there's a deeper order to things, even if we don't always see it.
Could be. Now, get ready for this one. Here comes a line that's echoed through history. Be fruitful and multiply.
Talk about a loaded command, right?
It really makes you think about the layers of meaning there.
Mm.
Because it's not just about having kids, right?
Mhm.
Could be about expanding our knowledge, developing culture, all sorts of things.
Maybe realizing our potential, both as individuals and as a species.
Could be.
Okay, and then finally, humans arrive on the scene. But not just any humans. Humans made in the image of God.
That's where things get really interesting, don't you think?
Absolutely. What does it even mean?
That phrase has kept philosophers and theologians debating for centuries. I mean, what does it truly mean to bear the image of God? What do you think?
The YouTuber dives into all these different interpretations, like our physical form, our intellect, our capacity for moral reasoning.
And it's not just about what we are, right? It's about our place in the grand scheme of things. This idea that humans have a unique position within creation.
And with that position, I guess, comes responsibility, right?
That's it. Because dominion over all living things,
Yeah, dominion.
that's not something to take lightly.
No, it isn't. And the video does a good job of showing how there are different ways to think about that word, dominion.
Right.
Like some people see it as responsible stewardship, where we're supposed to care for the environment.
Mhm.
Others see it as, we're at the top of the food chain and we can do what we want.
And that debate has huge implications for how we live our lives, how we interact with other species, even the future of our planet.
It's amazing that one line from an ancient text can still be relevant today.
Isn't it?
Okay, to finish up this Genesis 1 analysis, we get to the big finale, right? God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good.
It's like the ultimate stamp of approval.
Totally. It's like a sense of completion and
Yeah.
satisfaction, you
Yeah.
know? But it does make you wonder, right? What does good mean in this context?
Yeah, I mean, does it imply perfection, like a finished product? Or is there room for growth, for change, maybe even evolution? It makes you think about how this idea of goodness shapes our values even today.
For sure. Okay, we've covered a lot of ground with Genesis 1. From this empty void to a world full of life, from the setup of time to the complexity of humans and our role in creation. But now we have Genesis 2 to explore.
Yeah, ready to dive deeper.
Absolutely. Let's do it. Okay, so back to Genesis 2. I'm especially intrigued by that excerpt, Genesis 2.425, that we're focusing on today. You know, the creation of Adam and Eve, that whole Garden of Eden thing, and of course the Tree of Knowledge. Before we really dig in, what are your initial thoughts about this passage?
Well, to me, it's like a different lens on the creation story.
Oh, how so?
It's like Genesis 1 gives us the big picture,
Yeah.
right? The wide shot.
Right.
And then Genesis 2, it's like zooming in for a close-up. It's a more intimate view.
I like that analogy, like we're getting a behind-the-scenes look. So let's talk about Adam. In Genesis 2, he's formed from dust. God breathes life into him. It's pretty different from the way humans are created in Genesis 1, don't you think?
It really is. And I
Mhm.
think that image of Adam being formed from dust, it's not random. It's got to mean something.
So what does it mean?
Well, think about it. Dust. It's the earth.
Right.
It represents our connection to it, our dependence on it.
Yeah, it really grounds us, literally.
Exactly. And it emphasizes our physical nature, that we're
Yeah.
part of this world, and also, I think, our mortality.
Oh, I see. We come from dust and will return to dust.
Right.
Okay, that makes sense. And then we have Eve, created from Adam's rib. What do you make of that?
You know, that's one of those passages that has generated endless discussion. I mean, on one hand, it emphasizes how connected man and woman are. They're literally made from the same stuff.
Right, they're two halves of a whole, kind of.
Yeah. But then, of course, it's also been used to justify, some pretty traditional views about gender roles. Women being subservient to man.
Well, how do we reconcile those two things?
Yeah, that's the challenge, right? These ancient texts often contain these seeming contradictions, but that's what makes them so interesting to explore.
I mean, it makes you wonder how people understood gender roles back then.
Absolutely. And how those understandings continue to evolve and change over time.
Okay, speaking of fascinating places, let's get back to the Garden of Eden for a minute. It's such a vivid setting.
It's like the opposite of that void in Genesis 1, right?
It's like totally.
It's paradise.
Uh-huh.
It's abundance, beauty, all needs are met. Humans living in harmony with nature.
No wonder we're so drawn to this idea of a lost paradise.
Right. It speaks to something deep within us,
Yeah.
like a longing for that kind of perfect harmony.
But then there's the serpent and the tree of knowledge. That's where the temptation comes in, right?
Yep, and disobedience.
Which leads to the loss of paradise. It's interesting how knowledge is portrayed as both desirable and dangerous at the same time.
I think that's a theme that pops up throughout history and even in our lives today, don't you think? Like, what knowledge is actually good for us? Are there things we're better off not knowing?
That's a tough one.
And it feels even more relevant now in this age of information overload.
That's true. It's like, what information do we trust? What's actually valuable?
Big questions. And it's fascinating how a story this ancient can still raise such timely issues.
Okay, before we go any further, I want to bring up that phrase we talked about earlier. A helper fit for him used to describe Eve. It's such a loaded phrase, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And it highlights how these texts can be interpreted in very different ways, some more progressive than others.
Some people read it and see traditional gender roles being reinforced, you know? Others see it as suggesting an equal partnership.
I think it's important to acknowledge both perspectives. We can learn from how these texts have been understood throughout history, while also challenging assumptions that don't align with our values today.
That makes sense. You know, the YouTuber we mentioned made a point about this that really stuck with me. He talked about how even if you don't take the story literally, it can still give you a useful framework for navigating the world.
I like that.
Yeah.
Like, it's not about the literal truth of the story, but the bigger ideas.
Yeah, exactly. It's those underlying themes that make it so enduring.
And there are so many of those themes, right?
Like dominion, we talked about how it can be understood as responsible stewardship or just plain exploitation. And those different ways of seeing dominion play out in the real world all the time, like how we treat the environment, for example.
It's like the Genesis story gives us a way to think about these issues, even if we disagree on the specifics.
Totally. It makes us ask these big questions like, are we here to dominate and exploit the planet? Or are we supposed to care for it? What does it mean to be responsible for something as vast as nature?
Those are huge questions. And I think the Genesis story, with all its layers of meaning, it gives us a way to at least start thinking about them.
It's almost like a different lens through which to view our relationship with the environment.
And that's just one example. There's so many other themes in these stories that resonate with our lives today, like the pursuit of knowledge, the consequences of our choices, the desire for connection, the struggle between good and evil.
It's like these ancient stories are tapping into something universal.
Totally. They're speaking to the human condition, no matter what culture you come from or what time period you live in.
And that's probably why they're so enduring. They're thousands of years old, but they still have this power to speak to us today.
Because at the end of the day, they're about who we are, where we come from, and our place in the universe.
Okay, before we move on to the last part of our deep dive, I think it's time for another thought-provoking question for our listeners.
Oh, good. I love these. Hit me.
What if you could ask the creator one question about this whole creation story? What would it be?
Whoa, that's a good one. It really makes you think about what we're really curious about, our origins, our purpose, the nature of creation itself.
It's a question with endless possibilities. Welcome back to our deep dive, everyone. You know that question we left you with, the one about asking the creator a question. It really got me thinking. I mean, if I could ask anything. Well, the possibilities are kind of overwhelming.
I know, right? It's such a deceptively simple question, but it really gets to the heart of what makes these deep dives so fun. We start with a specific topic and specific sources, but the conversation can go almost anywhere.
It really can, like following a trail of breadcrumbs, each one leading to some new insight or a whole new set of questions.
And we've covered so much in this deep dive, from that big cosmic view of Genesis 1 to those up-close and personal details of Genesis 2. Light and darkness, order and chaos, the power of naming, the diversity of life, humans' place in it all, dominion, Eden, the temptation of knowledge, the relationship between men and women.
Wow, when you list it out like that, it's amazing we fit it all in. And we didn't even shy away from the hard stuff, like how do we make sense of ancient texts with modern values? Or what does it even mean to be responsible for this planet?
I think it's a real testament to how powerful these stories are, that they can still spark these really lively conversations that are so relevant to our lives today.
Absolutely. Before we wrap up, I want to go back to something we touched on earlier about how the Genesis creation story can be this metaphorical framework for understanding the world, even if you don't take it literally.
Yeah, it's less about the historical events and more about those big universal themes and lessons that we can apply to our own lives.
For me, one of the biggest takeaways has been about responsibility.
Dominion and stewardship. That we're not just here to exploit creation, but to actually care for it.
Exactly. And honestly, that message couldn't be more important now with everything going on in the world. Climate change, pollution, deforestation.
It's heavy stuff.
It is. But I think the point is that these aren't just abstract problems. They're the result of choices that we've made, and we have a responsibility to do something about it.
And that sense of responsibility extends beyond just the environment, right?
Yeah.
I mean, about how we treat each other, our communities, the whole world, really.
Like creating a world where everyone can thrive. It's almost like that line, and God saw that it was good, takes on a new meaning when you apply it to how we live our lives.
It does, doesn't it? It becomes more of a challenge, I think, to create that goodness ourselves.
Okay, so as we end our deep dive today, I want to leave you with one final thought. This time, it's not a question, more like a challenge, I guess.
A challenge? Okay, I like it. What is it?
Take everything we've talked about today, all those insights and questions, and apply them to your own life. How can you be a better steward of this planet? How can you help build a more just and compassionate world? What kind of legacy do you want to leave behind?
Whoa, big questions, but definitely worth thinking about.
They are big, but the great thing is there's no one right answer. It's all about finding your own way to make a difference, right? Whether you're inspired by ancient stories or modern ideas, or just what's in your own heart.
So to everyone listening, I say keep exploring, keep asking questions, keep diving deep, and most importantly, never stop trying to make the world a little bit better in whatever way you can.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Until next time, happy diving, everyone.